Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that this was a live recording. We had many members of my daily meditation course attend live and ask questions. Now, normally this is a one-way conversation wherein I am, of course, mic'd, and others in the Zoom session are muted. Unfortunately, in this session, somebody had unmuted themselves, either knowingly or unknowingly. And so on occasion, throughout the video, or at least the first maybe quarter of the video, when that person moved around or made a sound, the video would train on them as well as the sound. And so it kind of interrupted the conveyance a bit. And so for my meditation students, we can look at this as a good thing, in that life often serves you, eggs you don't like. It's going to sometimes not to exactly live up to your standards of what is pleasant or professional or helpful or whatever. And the key to staying in a state of awareness is to accept those moments as they occur without condemnation, and just stay aware of the entire space. And so that would be my recommendation for those who are watching, assuming that this does become a published live YouTube video. Those who view the video as well might consider taking on that approach to accept all that's occurring without having any shift or condemnation or a negative feeling inside, but just flow with what comes, as the boxer's famous saying, roll with the punches. And with that, let's begin the session. All right, so wonderful to see you all here. I know that some of you have taken time out of other activities. Some of you are up rather late to view this, people in other countries, and I really appreciate the time you're taking to be here. Know that your presence affects this session and that your questions are going to determine to a great extent where this goes. I don't know where this is going to go at all. I only know or have some inclination of where it's going to begin. I myself, there'll probably be some things revealed here that I have not been previously aware of, and things that I've not discussed with anybody before. And they're going to certainly pertain to the world situation now and our own individual spiritual path in the context of our world situation. And so with that, I'm going to start with a book called The Unbound Soul. And so this book is the first book I wrote, and in here it's a visionary guide to spiritual transformation and enlightenment, which means it's a visionary guide. This entire book is written based off of a number of visions that occurred in my life from young childhood on. Some of these visions were premonitory or prophetic. The key to this book, as I see it, is that it was written very much from the Achuar perspective, or it's a tribe of people that live in the Amazons. The Achuar, as well as the Shar and a number of other native tribes in the Amazon, have a dream ceremony. Every morning they wake up around 4 o'clock in the morning, the whole tribe, elders as well as the children, and they gather in a circle and they share their dreams. Now, the spirit of sharing their dreams is such that they don't believe the dream message is necessarily for themselves personally, but it's for potentially somebody else or the entire tribe. And so they don't take their dreams personally, but instead as just a message to share with other people who may gain some benefit out of it. And so in light of that idea, which I really loved, The Unbound Soul was written similarly. I did not share the visions that I had through my interpretation of them. I shared them as they came to me, with as little distortion as possible, on the assumption that they may be for others. Now, it's true that in a number of these visions, there's elements that pertain to me personally, and some of which I shared, but to me, that wasn't the most important aspect of the vision, and it wasn't the most important thing to be written. Some of it had to be written just to clarify where the book is coming from and where the message is coming from. But just know that the messages and the vision that's shared here is not my personal interpretation of it. It doesn't matter if I agree with it or disagree with it. There are certain things in the vision that were shared with me that maybe I didn't agree with. I just shared it as it was as it occurred. It's not an endorsement of any view. You see it? All right. And then as I share this, I would like to there are a number of terms, as I share it, because I shared it as it was shared with me at the time. As I read now, I'm going to share it as it's read, but then I'll break for a moment to give some clarification of what I understood it to mean later in my own awakening process. Because a number of aspects of these visions I didn't understand when it was written or when it was received. And the realization or revelations that occurred later shone light on these earlier visions, which I'm going to share now. And that will make the visions much more practical for your daily life and your awakening path. All right. So I'm going to begin first with the concept of experience and isness. And this is chapter 5 for those of you who don't have the book. If you're ever interested in getting it, you can look this up and see more. I'm only going to read a part of this vision now to give you a basic understanding of what I mean by the transcendent or isness or so on and so forth. Okay. Finally, so I'm in a visionary state. I'm not going to give the background and the whole intro to the chapter or anything like that. I'm just going to cut to the chase. So I'm in a visionary state. And it feels like I'm rising up through these realms or spiritual dimensions or something like that within my body. I entered the consciousness of the sun, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, and beyond. Each has its own identity, feeling, responsibility, knowledge, wisdom, and so on. I went through spirit worlds and what felt like heaven. Finally, I encountered a great void, and just beyond it, a presence, intelligence, and power so perfect and loving that there are no human words to describe it satisfactorily. It was utterly whole, holy. We humans have a very limited idea of what love is and of what God is. And at that moment, my limited perception of both evaporated. The limitless presence began communicating with me, not in words, but in direct understanding. It seemed as if it put knowledge and experience directly into my consciousness, so information came through purely, beyond the filters of the mind and limitations of words. I inquired, "What are you?" Its answer, as best as I can put it into words, was, "There is no other." Indeed, this presence felt to be exactly as it described itself, but I just could not wrap my mind around the next logical implication, that we were one and the same. The all-loving presence was unmistakable, yet what it was saying just did not make sense to my logical mind. How was it possible that it was me if I did not perceive myself as being it? If I was it, then I would be equally aware. And since I had no such awareness, this seemed proof that what it was saying could not be true. So I decided to question this presence further, hoping to resolve the ultimate Gordian knot. I started out by asking, "What am I?" It replied, "No other than I." I was shown how it was always aware of me, even though I was entirely unaware of it up until that moment. I had read the assertion of Jesus that God is the Alpha and the Omega, which means all that is, and the words of Buddha that ultimate reality is oneness. But words are not actuality. The experience is so difficult to adequately explain that words feel like lead dropping from my lips, heavy and out of place. That is still the case. My mind partially resisted understanding, yet somehow I knew it was true. A power resided in this presence that was incomprehensible, yet utterly palpable. If this was God, it was clearly beyond the God that I imagined when reading the Bible. The portrayal of God in most accounts reminds me of a violent, racist, jealous, wrathful, insecure, judgmental man. But I found absolutely no condemnation in this presence, nor is there wrath, jealousy, or negativity of any sort. This presence is perfectly forgiving, knowing that there is nothing to forgive, non-judgmental and unconditionally loving. Its perfection and love are so enlightening that although it did not judge me, by stark contrast, I could not help but see the imbalance in myself. The light of this presence is so pure that anything seeming less than total purity stands glaringly forth out of place, although my mind was not aware of this until several months later. My conscience greatly amplified, and I understood that no thought, feeling, or deed of inequity goes unresolved. Until the resolution, the individual cannot truly be at peace and will continue to experience separation. The soul within constantly draws to the individual the perfect opportunity for balancing through the situations, events, and relationships of life. Our attitude towards these things either binds or frees us. Because the word God carries with it so many negative associations, and since this presence is beyond the binds of all definition, the word God just felt inadequate to me. I tried to come up with a term to more accurately portray its limitlessness. The best one I could come up with was the least defined. It simply is with no qualifiers, and so I began calling it isness for lack of a better term. Isness unconditionally forgives all things instantly. Even the most evil individual is fully and completely loved by this presence. Able to perceive all universes, bound by nothing, it knows no fear. Only total harmony and oneness. To feel one with isness became my goal. The feeling is summed up well in the New Testament. Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. I felt that this was possible for all, but I wondered how my mind could create such a convincing sense of separation, negativity, and disharmony. I asked, how is it that I perceive myself as different from you? How is it that I perceive myself as being imperfect? How is it that I can perceive imperfection at all? My attention was directed to what appeared as a giant nebula or star-forming region of space. When I focused on that region, I saw that it was really a clouded mind surrounded by darkness. It had a curious, playful nature, yet it seemed ignorant of its identity and was immersed in the undirected play of self-discovery, like that of a young child. From this curiosity, countless universes arise, expand, and extinguish, only to birth again and repeat the process with a slightly different angle on things. I understood that there were uncountable universes of many different natures, some similar to our own and many not, seeming to be of different dimensionality. I was shown countless billions or trillions of years in an instant. Across these universes, ignorance of isness and the desire to define the self is common. But as deeply engrossed as this clouded mind seemed in its play, it was never for a moment actually outside of or separated from isness. Otherness was merely a playful dream. The idea of the individual self is, according to isness, not ultimately true. There's a lot more to this chapter, but before we can go any further, it's important that we get some fundamental understanding of what's really going on here. And of course, some of this is just utterly beyond words. And so I would like to open this up to any questions or insights that you might have. You can type into the chat space before we go on. We kind of have to understand what love is in order to understand this vision, do we not? Right? We need to understand the relationship we have with this isness in order to go further, do we not? What other questions do we need? What are our blockages? What are our assumptions regarding our relationship to the transcendent? If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in. Got a couple of questions coming, and I'm just going to make sure everybody's muted. All right, so the first question is, do we need to understand or embrace it? Beautiful question. The first aspect is that you cannot, by definition, isness is beyond definition. its nature is such that it is non-formed. It has no dimensionality at that most basic fundamental level, which means that it defies all aspects of the mind. The definition of mind is definition. That is what mind does. It is the nature of mind to define, to form, and to articulate that form, right? Consciousness and mind we could look at as like two halves of the same coin. One is the non-formed aspect, and the other is the format aspect. This is what isness was trying to tell me. The non-formed aspect and the formed aspect are actually one and the same. My persona, the Richard form, is merely the physical expression, a potential of isness in its own exploration of what it is. So ask yourself this question: that which is beyond time, that which has never been birthed, from where does it come? What is its origin? Even isness doesn't know the answer to that question. See, we assume God knows the answer. There's something God does not know. It does not know where it comes from. God, I'm using this word, I mean, the transcendent, you can call it whatever you want, the Buddha nature or the fundament of existence and non-existence. Isness both is and is not simultaneously. There's nothing you can point to and say, that is isness. At the same time, everything you point to is isness. It's not dependent on any other aspect to exist at that level. And so when I'm referring to isness in this case, I'm referring to the non-formed aspect of it. However, this is also an expression of isness. It's not separate. From that perspective, that's the story of Jesus on the cross, where the Christians say, Jesus is God and Jesus is man. It's actually kind of true from the isness perspective, whether you believe in Christianity or not, the principle we're talking about, but that would also apply to you. That would apply to the fly, would apply to the table, would apply to the turd. You see, it's all part of one thing. So the second half of this question is, well, so of course, do you need to understand it? And then, which it technically can't be. I mean, basically what I've said is about as, you can't go any further than that. As soon as you start going further than that, language doesn't work anymore. So there's nothing you can convey, right? The other aspect is, do you need to embrace it? That's totally personal. So that depends on the individual's awakening trajectory or path, which means even if you don't embrace it, there's nothing of your body and mind that's not it. The very thing you're breathing is it. The thing that breathes it is it. I don't know if you can embrace it any more than that. I mean, you have no choice. You are it at a most fundamental level. And so whether we are aware of that is the question. And also, do we like that or not? I guess that, I mean, I don't know if opinions really mean anything as far as I'm concerned. It's like being angry or disliking the nature of existence doesn't really change the fact that you experience. Liking it doesn't change the fact that you experience. In either case, it's just happening. Opinions don't really mean that much. Now, if you would like the quality of your life to improve, changing the attitude to accept all that is, to accept isness, and the fact that isness is throughout all that is, that there's nothing that's not isness, will certainly improve the quality of your life. And this is what a fundamental aspect of the teaching here. So it loves everything unconditionally without judgment. How is that possible? Well, the word love can only actually have any meaning at this level when you understand that from its perspective, it is everything. It is the turd. It is the killer. It is everything. And so once you start to see that it's all manifestation, there is no opposite not to love. It's the realization, and it's not judging, because it realizes when isness, let's say when isness, another good way of saying this, when innocence goes through into the portal of the potential or the portal of the form, when it's stuck in form, it itself isn't aware. It's not aware that it's actually beyond, that exists beyond form. That is your experience to some degree, right? It's not that it's wrong. If we think of isness as a creator, and then we think of the universe as the created, we get lost. Because we're taking something that's fundamentally transcendent to time, that isn't actually happening in time, and we're trying to funnel it through the brain, the human mind, because it's such a small little contraption, and it's only capable of perceiving such a small little narrow bandwidth. It has to actually stretch everything out into this idea of moments. We got moment number one, moment number two, and that's what we call time. That's all it can do. And so it actually takes that time projection and then applies that to the concept of isness, as if isness, there was first isness and then there was creation. No. It's simultaneous. There's no first and then second. There isn't one that's above or below. Those are all just human concepts. It's not wrong. I mean, we got this just ever so slightly, evolved beyond monkeys, so to speak. I mean, the fact that we can talk about this at all is amazing. It's not wrong. If we're not aware of it, that's not wrong. Awakening to the fact doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you any more spiritual. The dumbest person on the planet isn't any more spiritual than the most awakened person on the planet, because the very nature of both is isness. You don't get any extra points for awakening. If you're trying to awaken for points, for credit, to put a crown on your head or stroke yourself or get to seventh heaven or whatever, that's just ego. That is the thing that keeps you separate from it. Right? And so it's just be really authentic. And it's absolutely isness from that level, at that level of non-form, doesn't care if you believe in it or not, or if you knew its name or not. It doesn't matter if you like it, or it's not caught up in any of that. It doesn't care about any of that. It's whatever. It's an experience that's happening. That's all that's going on. You have a moment. You've got this moment. That's it. There isn't a next moment and a next moment and a next moment, nor is there a prior moment. There's this. Memory is the only thing that allows you to have this concept that there's a past moment and a future moment. But the memory isn't ultimately true. All right. Let's see where, I love these questions. They're coming in quicker than I can answer. I'm just kind of rambling on here. Let's see. No. Does the human mind have the capacity to understand the limitlessness of isness? This is a beautiful question. At the current evolution of the human mind, the answer is no. Now, what seems to be happening in the evolutionary process of organisms is that the mind is becoming ever more capable of opening up. Maybe at some point the mind will see beyond time. To comprehend it might not be the right answer. To experience it is really probably much more correct. To comprehend it is almost like an academic point of view. I don't think that will ever happen. But to be able to tune into it and experience it, absolutely. That's something that Richard's body has been able to do. And he's no genius. So if Richard's body can do this, it's potential for everybody in terms of the experience of it. So another question is, what is the purpose for our separation from isness? In truth, it's not a separation, but it is, we can say, all there are is perspectives. There's this perspective that is not timeline-based perspective. That is what I refer to as isness in this chapter, the Godhead, the transcendent energy, whatever you want to call it, the non-formed. And then there's the formed. Understanding that in order for the form to exist, it's just a potential. This is just a potential that consciousness, a game that consciousness can play. It's playing all potential simultaneously. So there's all these other universes and dimensionalities and other iterations of quote-unquote physicality. It's not that one of those potentials is better than the other. And it's understandable that as it goes into an atom, it has to achieve a form. has to take on a form, which means it has to have some level of definition. As something is defined, it is also limited. Definition, by definition is limiting. If you focus your life towards becoming a master musician, quite naturally, you had to sacrifice some other things because you only have so much time in a day. To experience musicianship to any level of degree, you have to give up some other areas of study. Some other of your time has to go. The experience is in time. That is the potential of our universe, is a time-based experience. And so, therefore, what ends up happening is you have an embryo, or you have this little organism that's in the womb that's developing, an embryo, and as it develops a nervous system which has senses, which allows it to interact with its environment. Prior to the senses, all there is being. There's no understanding of anything. There's the experience of isness fundamentally in the womb, because the mind has yet to develop within that embryo sufficient enough to have a personal I experience. But in order for that embryo to actually develop a body that can function, it needs tighter and tighter definitions. It needs to know the difference between its body and the wall. Those are definitions that are built into the sensory system of the creature. It's like you're not responsible and like personally, it's not your fault for having a sense of separation. It's not like you've done something wrong. This is just part of the evolutionary process. As isness forgets itself once it goes into identification, then it evolves through the various forms of in time, through that perception of time, to ever more complex forms that are then capable of exploring the nature of physicality and refining the nature of isness within the physicality. So it's like this descent, or the Christians would say, or the Jewish would say, a drop out of Eden, and then a reascent, becoming aware through the form of the individual and the totality. It's not that one is right or one is wrong. They're both right when it's time for you to be aware of that. And there's no point yelling at as I like to say, no point yelling at the flower that hasn't bloomed yet, the bud, you need to mature. There's no point yelling at your 11-year-old child, you need to enter puberty. It doesn't work that way. It's not like the open flower is better than the closed flower. It's all in its time and its place, right? All right. Does discussing isness open us up to experiencing it for ourselves if we have yet to experience it? That is a very good question. It plants a seed, which means that every word that's spoken, everything that happens in the universe effectively functions as a force. Your brain is interacting with the environment around it at all times. Everything that it sees, everything that it smells, everything that it hears, everything that it senses, everything that it comprehends, everything that it thinks of are forces. Everything that it feels are forces that motivate further awareness, further exploration. Right? There's no way to stop that process. In the same way, this discussion becomes a force that can trigger. It's like a nutrient that you would pour on the flower. You can't yell at it to awaken. You can't yell at it to bloom, but you can give it some water. You can give it some nutrient. And in time, it'll open. Now, if you don't give it that nutrient, it might just wither and die. Then it doesn't have the experience. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay, so I'm going to try and figure out what this is. My own experience is a question is, I'm going to, the grammar here is not quite full. My own experience is that maybe a question is formed in our mind during a vision, and the answer just appears directly in our mind. No language or picture, just knowing. And it can be a shock after each of my visions. They usually end with dying, i.e. drowning, i.e. being drowned or buried alive or subjected to very small claustrophobic places, etc. Okay, so there's the structure of the language there is a little bit rough. So I'm going to take a guess at what he's saying here, and that is that now it's true that the isness experience was not language based. So I had to translate the direct understanding into language to give. There wasn't a voice in my head. It was just direct knowing. And there are many types of mystical experiences. Some can come in visionary form. Some can come in audio form. Some feels just like a download. There's nothing going on, but suddenly you stop and there's like, you feel like there's this download that's coming into your brain from where you don't know. And some of these things can occur in dream state, some while awake, some while in this in-between state that I call the twilight zone. I guess they all have their purpose, you know. Don't get too caught up in them, though. They don't, that you have visions doesn't make one any more special than anyone else. And one can get lost in visionary states because they're so grand and so amazing. Now, one of the things he talked about here is drowned or buried alive or subject to claustrophobic spaces. Yes, it seems to be that, for example, it's not the first time. Several of the cases where Richard had visions were in moments of life and death situations or shortly after. So one of them was, for example, a horse kicking at the back of his head when he was cleaning. And his body just moved out of the way. It knew it was coming, even though logically he did not. And then he whacked the horse away and it took it out of the stall, which is something he shouldn't have been cleaning the stall with a horse in there to begin with. But, kids. I was a kid at the time, and my mother had warned me many times, and I was trying to save a few moments so I could probably run back in the house and play a video game, or who knows. I don't remember what it was I was doing at the time. But once I removed the horse, a strange thing had happened where the body, it was in a very altered state, clearly altered state, that led it into a vision. One of the first visions I write about in the Unbound Soul, which I'm not necessarily going to discuss here, sort of a vision of what I'm doing now with you is teaching these principles. So the second one was when someone tried to mug me, and they had a knife, and thereafter I had a visionary state later that afternoon. So if you look at the Lakota people or many tribal people, they will oftentimes put their bodies through extreme, like the sun dance is an extreme experience where they're actually like taking hooks under their skin and ropes to this pole, and they're dancing around it trying to rip these hooks out of their chest. But this process puts them into an altered state where they oftentimes have visions. They will also, many tribes around the world, they will dance to the drum beat to utter exhaustion, where they just like collapse out unconscious, but then have visionary states. It's like putting the body through some extreme situation intentionally oftentimes will lead you into, but sometimes unintentionally, like in my case, they just happened. Black Elk talks about being sick. There's a book called Black Elk. You might enjoy reading it, about being just deathly sick. He almost died and fever and all that. And during that time, he had a vision. So that's not all that uncommon. Okay, so there's a question how to make room for isness to fully express. And that is interestingly, it seems to be what the human trajectory is, a greater expression of its fundamental nature. Meditation. So for example, we do the total embodiment meditation, that spherical awareness. Ultimately, in that process of that spherical awareness, we're softening our assumptions of self and other, right? That stage is very, very important practice. And we're feeling, but ultimately there starts to be this strange occurrence. So with Richards, there's this feeling as if the walls, the floor, the ceiling, they're somehow conscious and alive. Not in the way that not in a personalized way like you are, not in an egoic way, but just that they have perception. And they would like to have a happy atmosphere. They suffer too, in a sense that they're affected by your atmosphere. Whether that's true or not, I cannot say. That is just the experience. I can only describe the experience of it. All right. But as we have more and more of those transcendent of the body experiences, it opens up, it shifts something in the brain and allows, it's like planting a seed or watering that flower. and allows for a greater and greater connected awareness to isness instead of a disconnected, or it's always connected, but a lack of awareness of that fundamental nature that's, as the Lakota call it, the spirit that runs through all things. I'm interested in how we take this isness and make it functional beyond interesting conversation. It seems to me that it is what we are doing with TEM, learning how to use our senses to interface even briefly with the experience of isness. If we don't have a sensory experience of isness, all we are left with is an intellectual concept. Understand a couple of points. There is something more fundamental than the senses. So Richard's experience of isness wasn't through the senses originally. It was at a deeper level, which is feeling. Feeling is fundamental to perception. Perception and feeling are simultaneous. And that is the doorway to conscious awareness of isness, because isness has feeling, it has perception, just as you have feeling and perception. It is the fundament of your perception, including the sensory perception. It's like the very root of it. And so getting to the root of feeling, and I don't mean emotions, it's different. And I don't mean thoughts, I don't mean opinions. How do you feel about that chocolate cake? That's not what I mean. That's an opinion. That's very distant from, in terms of the experience or insperience of isness. That's sort of a self-absorbed type feeling. We're going to get into the very fundament of feeling, which is one of the reasons why Richard stresses again and again, and each step of the meditation, don't focus on the particular sound. Don't label it. Go back to that feeling. Go back to direct awareness. Just stay with the sense purely, almost like an infant would when it doesn't yet quite know how to use the sense to identify something. That takes us toward, over time, greater and greater conscious connectivity with isness. Otherwise, as Glenn Taylor says, all we're left with is an intellectual concept. And there's nothing could be further from isness than an intellectual concept. You could talk about God till you're blue in the face, but it doesn't give you the experience. And usually that just turns into some kind of ideology and philosophy that ends up causing all kinds of havoc in your life and everybody else's around you. One of the things that is helpful is gratitude. Just look at everything as if it felt, and start to interact with things as if on some level they cared, that they wanted to be happy. That includes the table, right? That's helpful. Now, the truth is you cannot walk, the universe is eating itself. It's like a fire consuming itself, a snake that's eating its own tail. That is the nature of the universe. We don't have 10 hours to explain that right now. So no matter what you do, no matter how careful you are, something will die. Something is being crushed under your foot. One cannot breathe without killing something. And so we just do it in the most humane way possible, understanding that not just animals, not just humans feel, plants feel. Everything feels. And we will all die. We will be eaten by the worms. That's part of life. It's not wrong. Okay, so can I explain, is there why we have certain gifts? Is there a hierarchy of angels? Let's say, whenever we ask the question, if you ask me, is there isness? I can't say, yes, there is isness. There's simply no way to prove it. What I can say is there's the experience of isness. But there can also be the experience of, I guess, what you would describe as angels. Supportive beings. It doesn't mean they're true. Maybe that's just a psychological trick that your brain plays on you to get a message across. I honestly don't care if they're true or they're not true. I don't care if this is true or not true. It's irrelevant. The fact is there is experience, and we can only work with the experience we have. And so you just try to work as best as possible with the experience you have, moving you toward something that's actually practical in your daily life, because a true connection with isness is practical. It's not just an abstract idea. It will transform your life in tremendous ways. So if you're experiencing angels, so long as it's not turning into ideology or philosophy, which is taking you away from awareness, then that's your experience. Who's to argue with it, right? But yes, Richard has experienced angelic forces as well as demonic forces. That again, it doesn't matter to me if they're real or not. That was the experience in visionary state. But there was a tremendous lesson learned from those experiences, or many tremendous lessons learned from those experiences. And what Richard would say is that those energies that represented as angels and demonic forces, those energies represent false ideas and correct ideas, or say helpful, we'll say helpful ideas versus unhelpful ideas within the human body. So the difference between an angel and demons in the Christian, Judeo-Christian view are actually fallen angels. So you have angels, which are servants of isness, right? Servants of God. I'm getting very, almost religious here, but I don't mean this in a religious way whatsoever. You could be atheistic, and as long as you're not closed off, you'll get the point. But when there's certain time in your life when an idea is helpful, that's serving as an angel. But once it's no longer helpful, if that idea is still serving in your life, you've become a prisoner to it. That's a fallen angel. That's a demon, right? You see it? I mean, just practically speaking, it's no longer serving you. You're serving it. You've become its bitch. You've become its slave, right? So when we awaken, we start to awaken to simple thing. Is this energy helpful? Is this idea helpful? And when it's not, you give it up. When you're asleep, you keep clinging on to it. And then what ends up happening is it imprisons the mind. And then the matrix of the self is all made up of that. You have someone you're talking to and you say some certain key word and suddenly they go off the rails. They go off the rails because they didn't actually hear what you meant. They heard something stuck in their consciousness. It was a trigger word that had some meaning associated to some traumatic event or some idea or philosophy. And now it's projecting onto you, right? That's not helping anymore, right? It's not helping anymore. So it's become a demonic force for all practical purposes. Certainly it's become a malicious energy. It's no longer benevolent. And those who are not awake are absolutely riddled with that. Maybe some of us are good at hiding it, and that's what our mask is about. But others of us are not good at hiding it. In any case, we're all suffering. And that's what we're suffering from, is an inner malice, condemnation, blame, shame, judgment, and all that stuff that isness doesn't do. We're waking up to doing that less. Right. Look, is there any recommendation to lead and give people hope in these difficult times? I've been experiencing a release from fears, given they're not as important as conveying the message of hope and light right now. However, I sometimes wonder if I'm doing enough. Okay, so this is a very simple answer. And you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in isness. You don't have to believe in a damn thing. Incidentally, I don't believe in isness because it's irrelevant. My belief doesn't make a difference one way or the other. If it's true, it's true. If it's not, it's not. It doesn't matter. So the only question, practically speaking, is, am I doing something useful in this moment? Am I doing something helpful in this moment? Is what I'm doing in this moment feel meaningful to me by my own definition? That's it. That's all you got. If you go another route, you end up binding yourself by other people's ideas. And then you live a hollow life. Now, what will end up, when we first start doing this, other people will say, oh, well, you're being selfish. But what ends up actually happening is something in the deep inside starts to awaken. Awareness starts to awaken. And your inner compass starts to stop spinning so much. And you start to become aware almost at an intuitive level or feeling level of what is helpful beyond the ideas. And so your almost skill at becoming more aware of what is helpful refines. It's not exactly a skill, but and what is meaningful starts to refine, and that takes you on this course of awakening and ultimately allows that flower to bloom. But if you're living your life by how other people say you should live, that takes us in the opposite direction. That's back to sleep. There's no authenticity there, right? How you work that into your private life. Say you want to be a musician and you can't make any money being a musician. Maybe that's your idea. Well, then you don't have to do it full time. You get a day job. And when I was writing this book, I was a day laborer. I was just doing sweat labor. I get up early and start writing, and then I go out and work till not from 9 to 5, come back, eat dinner, and then write again till 12 at night. And I did that 7 days a week, and until the book was done, and then I had to write another book, and I just kept doing the same thing, and then another book, and another. It wasn't until after the third book was done that I didn't have to be a day laborer anymore. So you just fit it into your life as you can. That's it, right? Don't make this too abstract. Don't make it too difficult. Don't think way too far ahead or turn it into a big problem. Keep it simple. Right now, are you where you need to be? Does it feel right to be here? Because if this doesn't feel right, if you're doing this out of a sense of obligation, go away. You're not doing me any damn favors, and you're not doing yourself any favors. Do what's right, what feels meaningful to you. If you feel like being here, then great. You see it? If you're sitting at home and you're just like not making use of your time and you're just watching Netflix, and you just ask yourself, is this useful? Is this making me more aware? Is this tapping into the soul, quote unquote, or isness? Or is this leading me toward awareness? Is this helpful or meaningful by my own definitions right now? You might find that when you ask that question, a lot of times the answer is no. And if it's not, well, then ask what's meaningful, what I ought to do. And it might just be simply doing some exercise, getting your body in condition, because it definitely needs to be that's your instrument. Everything that you ever do depends on the condition of your body. Get it in shape. Eat something good. Maybe not snack so much. All that, but if you don't ask the question and actually feel the answer, that's the key. Feel the answer. You're kind of still stuck in ideology. You're stuck in, you shouldn't smoke. This finger wagging, you shouldn't smoke. You need to quit smoking. Well, that works on almost nobody. You could do that to yourself your whole life and you probably won't quit. It's not till you really feel deeply that you get some clarity that's actually motivational. All right. Let's see. I got to go back here just a minute. Scanning back. Hopefully I'm not missing anybody. Okay. Now, one of the aspects of that last question is sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough. Doing enough to please who? That's the question. Doing enough to what measure? So the measure is only something inside of us, that deeper level. And it shouldn't, if it's at the level of like guilt or shame or blame, that's the demon speaking. that's the malice speaking. That's not the helpful force. We're going to go a little deeper than that. Sometimes it's right to take a rest. Music is the pause between the notes. There's a balance between activity and inactivity, right? Okay. Do we choose our reincarnated bodies or parents? Okay, so that question is assuming, depends on the level of perspective we're coming from. Do we choose? There's so much to this question, it's impossible to answer because the word choose is in there. What I will say is that, and this is something that can be very misleading to people, what I'll say is through all of the explorations that Richard has done, he cannot find a single actual choice. That doesn't mean there isn't choice. That just means he can't find it. So, for example, when Richard was asleep, there was certainly no choice. When Richard was highly unconscious, he was completely caught up in identities. That inner malice was taken over and would act like it was caring and kind and compassionate, and it was bullshit. But that wasn't a choice. It was unconscious. It was just the momentum of the ages coming through Richard's body. And then when Richard started to wake up to isness, Well, it was almost like isness hand comes through the body and the body starts behaving as a puppet, only now in a benevolent way. But that doesn't seem like a choice either now, does it? So I can't find choice, but the next logical thing the mind will do is say, well, then there is no choice, which now is saying, I understand the nature of the universe, which is something that isness itself doesn't do. If you asked isness, is there choice, it wouldn't give you an answer on that because it itself doesn't know its origin. If it doesn't know its origin, it doesn't understand its nature. If it doesn't understand its nature, how could it answer the question, is the universe of choice or is it not of choice? You see? And so what it's doing when it's in its balanced place is it's as if it's balanced between the idea of choice and not choice. It doesn't know, but it's curious and feeling. That's the secret. It's not to find the answer. It's to feel and look for the answer, not ever accepting the answer as true. It's exactly what they tell you, not the opposite of what they tell you in school, right? They tell you, first of all, generally speaking, they don't really want you to ask the question. That's very common. You know, it's understandable. Kids can be annoying. Parents do this too. Try to avoid the question. But two, they give you all the answers. So you've just lost the search. The best things you could do for your kids is not give them the answer. Make them search. The only truth you can find is something that's functional. But because the universe is constantly changing, what is functional today may not be functional tomorrow. Don't cling to it. Make use of it while it's useful and move on when it's not. So the goal of isness, in a sense, is to experience. We could say, in a sense, it's just a potential. It's not really a goal, but that's what's happening is that there is an element of experience, and that it's developing a concept of more experience, experiencing in new ways, its potentials. It's not actually to get an answer. How to tap into the soul's purpose? Feel. Feel. We already answered that one. Start just simple. What I'm doing right now, is this fulfilling? Is this meaningful? By my own definition. Is this beneficial in the long term? So some things that won't be pleasant, and I don't mean things that are pleasant or unpleasant. So we got to separate that out. That's very unawake perspective, is when something meaningful is just that which is pleasant or unpleasant. That's like 2-year-old mentality, right? In order to awaken, we have to accept all experience and respect all experience, not just avoiding what's unpleasant. Because many times the most meaningful things are unpleasant, things we don't like. Ask a deeper wisdom. It's in there. You just got to start asking. You know, Jesus says, keep knocking on the door, so to speak. That's actually very practical. Keep feeling, keep asking the question, keep knocking on the door. That's how you tap into the soul's purpose. Warrior's meditation. Get out of the limited sense of self. What inspires you to continue your unfoldment when there is no end goal? So this is important. The end goal is what the mind does. It's the nature of the mind is to make a goal and aim for it. Understanding that in that aim is both its strength and limitation. When your mind is aiming towards something, what happens when you're interrupted? You get frustrated, right? You get frustrated because you're aware, you lack awareness when you have an aim. You've actually excluded the rest of the universe and you're just focused on this one thing that you're moving toward. That's not awareness. That's the mind, right? So what we're moving is toward awareness. And as we move towards awareness, we develop an ability to make an aim that is not exclusive anymore. Instead of a to, there's a more of a toward type energy in what we're doing. Almost like a dog kind of meandering into a park, right? Wild animals do this. People would straight to point A to point B. And that's where we get lost. That's what cuts us off, right? And so awakening is, if it's a goal, that's not awakening. It has to be at a deeper level than that. It's sort of like, for Richard, there simply was no choice. It wasn't a choice. It was like, this is just what's happening, whether he likes it or not. This is what's happening. The opinion on it was completely irrelevant. Now, Richard had been in a suicidal state, and so he got to a point where he realized, I just cannot continue to live this very shallow, self-deceiving way, which is actually deceiving everybody else as well. I can't live this way anymore. So I'm going to kill myself. That was what had occurred. And now at that time, there was an intervention, so to speak. I had a visionary state that directed my life. And it said several very important things. Find friends who you'd like to be like, who are aiming for things that you would like to aim for, who are working for something positive in the world. That's very helpful. If you're surrounded by a bunch of narcissistic tendency type people, they're going to suck every last drop of useful energy out of you. You won't have anything left to grow that flower, so to speak. Right? That's very helpful. And then, of course, for me to start doing things which were meaningful. That's what I got that from a visionary state. Do that which is meaningful according to your own standards. And you can't go wrong if you start doing that. And so what inspires me is there's two things. There's one is it just feels good to be aware. I mean, it has its own, it's not a virtue or you don't get any extra credit, spiritual points for this. It just feels right to be aware. It feels good to be aware. Right? It has its own meaning that's beyond the definitions of the mind. Right? There's no trophies with this, but it has its own innate reward because that experience of isness is vibrant and fundamentally meaningful, but not in a logical way. And so that's a positive momentum forward. The other one is, I just absolutely do not want to go back to the way I was. That's the monster chasing you down the trail is, do you want to continue living that way? Do you want to continue living the way you are right now? If you're comfortable with the way you are right now, well, then just continue doing as you're doing. Richard couldn't do that anymore. And it reminds me of Eckhart Tolle talks about this. He was if you read his book, early on, he talks about his awakening experience. He was at a suicidal state, although I don't think he specifies that he experienced the room as being cold and distant and black and white. That is the edge of suicide. Everything feels so other that it's unbearable. And something broke within his psyche, and it opened up to isness, right? So it's not that being comfortable is right or wrong, or awakening isn't better than not awakening. It's none of that. It's just either it's happening or it's not, right? Either you feel like you don't want to live this way and you're not going to spend another moment of your life this way, or you're still kind of comfortable. And if you're comfortable, it's just simply not going to happen, right? Unlikely anyway. But again, it's not a goal. It's not like it's not something you have to do or should do. You're not wrong for not doing it, right? So that's hopefully that helps to clear. This is not religion where you've got to, join the troops or something. It's not that. But incidentally, when one awakens, it seems to buoy the body, and it seems to be generally beneficial for the environment and people around you. So that's a perk, even if that wasn't the aim. Acceptance is different from awareness. This is a question. Awareness is fundamental. Acceptance is an attitude. However, when we have acceptance, it becomes a kind of portal. It opens a possibility for awareness, right? If one does not have acceptance, is not experiencing acceptance, at that time, there is not awareness. It's a blockage, right? Now, if you go, like Eckhart Tolle, in his book, he talks about, basically, he was rejecting everything of life. That was not acceptance. If you go far enough in the negative direction, and you're sort of a somewhat sensitive individual, your psyche will break, and then you might just find yourself, either you kill yourself or awakening happens. You can go one way or the other. You can intend to awaken and go in one direction, like consciously, step by step every day. Or if you're, let's say, a highly sensitive individual, you resist everything, and eventually it's going to break. It'll pop. One isn't better than the other. It doesn't make one person special because they awoken in an instant, another one it took 20 years. It doesn't matter. That's just ego measuring things and causing more suffering. All right. It seems isness is a little cruel, putting humans through some horrendously cruel lives. That's beautiful. Now you hear it in that sentence. There's the idea that isness is something above us, and then we're completely disconnected. There's a creator and a creation, and the creator is punishing the creation. The awakening is the realization that the creation is isness. You are on the cross. The suffering you're experiencing, isness is feeling that. It's not isness is punishing you. It's not cruel. It is just what is occurring. It's not about punishment. But the question is coming from a feeling of non-acceptance. If we look within our bodies and we really notice this question, we may realize that there's a condemnation against life, that we may secretly wish, even unbeknownst to ourselves, that we were never born. And that is a blockage that needs to be worked through. And it comes to the energies of respect and acceptance. Those attitudes help us move in the right direction. Respect for what the moment brings and acceptance for what the moment brings. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It's acknowledging where it is, what is occurring now, feeling at a feeling level, not an intellectual level, but at a feeling level, and knowing that any forward movement happens in this moment. Working with it's like the boxers saying, roll with the punches. That is an awakening attitude. When the punch comes, instead of resisting it and complaining about it, which is going to get you knocked out, you actually start moving in the same direction with it, which imbalances the attacker a little bit and gives you openings. You move with the flow and redirect and guide, not resist. You see it? Although I fully feel, because it seems as if isness is a little cruel putting him through this horrendously cruel life, I fully feel where that's coming from, because that's how Richard used to feel. And Richard also, for a long time, had secretly wished he had never been born. Right? But no, with these the trick to all this is really attitude shift. It's so simple. It sounds so mundane. It's like something your sports coach would have told you. You need to change your attitude. And you're like, oh, screw you, Mr. Beck or whatever. But it's true. If there's nothing else that you got out of all of the process of anything you've ever done in your life, if you got that point, that was really helpful. Right? That was really helpful. Even if you never had the idea of spiritual awakening, but you got that point, that's really helpful. Now you apply that to every moment in your life, whoa, suddenly you're awake. Magic. And it's the same thing your darn coach has been telling you since you were a little kid. Right. Are you describing our individual calling? I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you rephrase that? Harvey? I wonder if you could rephrase that. I'm not quite getting what you mean by that. Pardon me. I'll come back to that in a moment if you're able to rephrase. Is there a difference between experience and expression? Isn't the latter the quality of the awakened? Okay, so yeah, we're using words, which means we have to work with the definitions of words. Experience is simply the process of gaining knowledge, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It is essentially memory. Experience is equal to memory. Memory is the nature of mind. Mind isn't just here, it is through all form. Genetics is a form of memory. Atoms have form, which means they have memory. Not a personal memory, but they have a memory which allows them to maintain a certain form and function. You see it? That is experience. Now, isness When we have that, it's not experience because there is no form. There may be a memory of it, but we need to separate the memory from the actual, what I describe as inexperience. Since everything of memory is something learned, the actual in the moment is not experience. It's inexperience. It's an inner, inspiring, non-form, non-learning based thing. You see it? It transcends the word experience. And then there is experience. That's the accumulation of knowledge and techniques and form and all that, which is almost everything that human beings are doing all the time. The difference between the awakened individual and one who's not awakened is that inexperience and experience come into harmony. That the transcendent, the formless, and the form become awake to each other and find harmony in the expression. Okay, hopefully that answered that question. Rephrase from Harvey. For me, calling comes without choosing, and there is neither reward nor punishment. Okay, so that's what you mean by calling. Yes. So the problem with the previous question was, are you describing our individual calling? Is this everybody had the same individual calling? That was where the confusion was, pardon me. So for those who consciously feel called to awaken, I mean, that's just your experience. So I guess I'm describing that to those of you who that is your calling, but for other people right now, that might not be it. Now, over the long term, ultimately everything awakens, I suppose. So I guess we could look at it two ways. In the fixed timeline perspective, in your individual experience of life, some of you consciously are aware of that calling and you're moving toward that, in which case I'm describing that. And the other perspective is that ultimately the entire universe is awakening to isness. So at that level, it's just a universal statement. All right. It looks like we've kind of gone through the questions. We didn't even get to the second vision. Is there anything else about this first vision that you guys have questions about? I don't know if I have time right now to get into the second one. We only got 20 minutes left. I got to be off at 1:30. So if there are no other questions, maybe we'll sign off. Now, how does this play into the world as it is now? This is important. The fact is, if there isn't a monster chasing after you, you all know it from your own life. You're going to be comfortable. It's that simple. If there isn't a monster chasing you down the trail and there's only a lighthouse, you'll feel like, I may or may not go home. I might just stay out in the ocean for a while, right? But right now we're at this period where there's a monster chasing us down the trail. Now, if there's no lighthouse and there's only a monster, what ends up happening is we run away from the monster, which means we can run pretty much in any direction we want except the monster, unless we prefer to be eaten, right? That's a type of running that most people are doing from the coronavirus or the difficulties of the world. They're running toward alcohol, they're running toward Netflix, they're running towards sex, they're running toward whatever. And those things are wrong, but they may not fit into the criteria of fulfilling or meaningful for you at this moment. Some of them may at certain times. There may be a time when drinking a beer is totally fulfilling. That's fine. There's nothing you can't learn from. But generally speaking, what you'll find is that when that criteria of what feels meaningful to me, what feels fulfilling to me, what right now, and not from ideology, but from a feeling level, what is useful or helpful right now, that takes us, that's the lighthouse. That's the lighthouse. And so now we've got a monster chasing us. We could run to the beer or the alcohol. We could run to the arguments with our husband and wives, or we could watch Netflix or go to sleep or whatever, or we could head toward the lighthouse. It's completely up to you. One is not better than the other. What I can say and what I can promise you is this: either way, you will suffer. Either way, you will suffer. The question is the suffering for awakening something that feels meaningful for you or not. Either way, it's going to be uncomfortable. The vast majority of the things that isness, quote unquote, I thought of it, I used to think of it as made me do. Now I see this doesn't really work that way, but that's how I saw it for a long time, is it had me actually facing fears and doing things that were extremely uncomfortable. And I'd ask about it, and it's like, absolutely, damn it, that is exactly what needs to happen. And I wasn't happy about that answer. But I knew that if I turned back, it would lead me right back to suicide. My monster was suicide. Right. And so there was just not an option. Okay, well, I guess I have to just dive in. I'm just going to do it. There's no point arguing about it anymore. I know I know the monster is there. And I know where the lighthouse is. And I got the choice of being it or I go to the lighthouse. And the lighthouse it's got its own monsters. It's not like a nice looking lighthouse all the time. People think of awakening to isness as this glorious, wonderful thing, and that's all it is. No, if you really want to awaken, what will happen is you'll take a skydive right into hell, consciously intending to see all the malicious energy within the body that comes up and expresses through you and uses you like a puppet and blocks awareness from the more fundamental things. And so you take a nosedive right into hell with the intention of, I'm going to let everything that's not true within this burn off. And hell is the hottest fire. I'm going to let it burn off. Some of you might be ready for that. Some of you might not. And that's not advice. Not that you should do it. But at some point, that's what will likely occur. Right? That's what will likely occur. Right now, we have the whole society is kind of ablaze, so to speak. This is a good opportunity if this is the time for you. You might feel into it individually. If it's not time for you, it's not helpful. And yes, there is neither reward or punishment for awakening. Although, as a side effect, you just generally a stronger, more capable, more loving, not person. The expression is all of those things described. But honest, authentic, which means you're able to say no when it's time to say no. You're not trying to please people or put on some image of I'm a sage or, worship me, or it's none of that. It's just authentic. It's like bones to bones, rock to earth, simple, authentic, complete in its simplicity. The burden of mundane, meaningless, pointless life is the monster. Yes. Yes, that's Janus. Janus, thank you. So there's a chapter in here, Janus, you might want to read. I'm going to go over a little bit right now, called The Gate. What is it called? I don't remember. Pardon me. The Gateway to Understanding. So in the Unbound Soul, it is chapter 21. I'm not going to gloss over it here. But fundamentally, at the deepest part of the human psyche, there is this monster that you're describing. The burden of mundane, meaningless, pointless life is the feeling, if I were to paint a picture, it is a feeling of, it's like you are, strip away all the body. There's no image, but there's perception. And there's just vast, infinite darkness. You're alone in vast, infinite darkness forever. And everything you've ever known, loved, or valued is no more. That is the place that gives birth to all of the inner demons we suffer from. Because we're trying to avoid that place in the psyche, which Janus has touched into. We're trying to avoid the meaninglessness of life, which incidentally, we've defined life, haven't we? So what is it that's defined it? The mind. This is a place in the psyche that is very far from isness. This is the place that Eckhart Tolle was at. And incidentally, it's extremely close to isness as well. Because once you relax into that place, suddenly it shifts and there's an innate meaning that emerges. That is isness. And it's no longer this projection of an individual and the opposing darkness forever. It's just oneness. And now we're not stuck in meaninglessness anymore, nor are we striving for finding meaning in identity. You see, this is where society is now. We're trying to find our meaning in identity. What am I going to become? Who am I going to be? Who am I? And if we don't like who we are, well, then we'll just change identity to be somebody else. If I don't like being male, I'll be female. If I don't like being this, I'll be that. Assuming that changing your identity is going to give you some important meaning. Temporarily, it will feel exciting. It will feel fresh and new. But the same hollowness will emerge. And it'll be worse still because you've just tried every trick and you've played every card in your hand. None of it worked. What happens then? That's suicide. When you've played all the cards in your hand and none of it worked, all the different identities you played didn't work, you got suicide. Or you become homicidal. Maybe you have this desire to destroy all of life. I mean, just as a service to put everybody out of their misery. You might even call that a service. Plenty of mass murderers have done that. You read their journals, and they talk about this pointless, meaningless of life, and how the greatest service they could do is just end everybody's existence a little bit early, put us all out of our misery. They think it's love. Maybe they're not the heartless people you thought they were, but they're confused. You see, they haven't actually consciously gone into this at a feeling level and rested in this meaningless pointlessness of life, fully accepting the fear until one relaxes to such a degree that poof, it opens. And then we realize it's all one. And that it is fundamentally meaningful in a transcendent way that has nothing to do with all the mental projections and our political ideology or religion or any of those specific things, anything we ever thought. And that there's, even if we've lost our life, even if we lost our loved ones, no matter what, there's still that fundamental meaning. The true you is not lost. It's always there. When we feel this mundane, meaningless pointlessness of life, what that means is we're not in touch with the truest element, the fundament of you, which is completely beyond your personality, beyond any idea you ever had, and beyond every memory you've ever had. In a sense, all of that dies. It's not that you don't have memories anymore or a persona. It's just that you don't believe any of them to be true. They're only useful. So Richard has this body. There's this body. It has a label. It's called Richard. So that Mark or Linda or Tony or Francesca or Christina can actually say, hey, Richard, what about? It's useful. That's all it is not who I am. If you are your body or any specific persona you've made up, in your own belief, in your own feeling, if that's what you are, that is what we are awakening from. That is what is causing the suffering. It's not that it's wrong. It's just it causes a hell of a lot of suffering. And as long as you're still up for the suffering, you'll continue doing that. Right? And at some point, you'll beat your head against the wall enough times that there will be a kind of suicide. It might not be a physical suicide, but it will be a suicide of the identity. A releasing of the specific identity. And it won't be like, call me nobody. It won't be that. Right? Still call me Richard. It's just inside, I don't really feel it's me. It's just a label for this body. That's all. You see it? All right. I think with that, maybe we'll close up, unless there's any other questions. Looks like I think we might have got out. Somebody's typing. And maybe we'll have to do another one, which goes on to another vision. If you guys are interested in that, maybe you might type in there and let me know how you feel about that. Thank you, Janus. Thank you, Tony. Go ahead and vote if you'd like to do another one. Yes, yes. Finding Jesus's bones. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes. I'm in. Okay, good, good. Well, your guys' presence here has really enabled this to occur. Your questions feel it all. And this is not at all a direction I would have imagined it would have taken. So I really appreciate the energy that you gave to this process. And hopefully you're there next time as well live, because your presence does matter. And so if you show up, I'm certainly going to show up for you. And I'd be happy if you showed up for me and showed up for everybody else. And we'll maybe a few weeks to give you some time to digest all this. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. Okay, thank you so much for watching to the conclusion. I hope you found this video helpful for your own understanding, your own awakening process. If you'd like to support more videos like this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Right now, I've only got about 800 subscribers. I need 1,000 in order to open up certain YouTube options, which will allow me to advertise this or spread it around a little bit more and get it greater notice so that it could be of greater service to more people. Also, the more you like it, you click like or comments, any comment that you can add helps the YouTube algorithm to spread this around to more people, and we never know how many people might make use of this video. Also, if you haven't seen the State of the World live stream number 1, you can find that. I'll have a link here in the upper right hand corner. So look in the upper right hand corner and link that. That goes much more into prophecy and how that plays out in boots on the ground right now in our world's chaotic situation and ever changing lifestyle. Hope you find it helpful, and hope to see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye.